Have you ever noticed how exam papers seem to repeat very similar questions year after year? Well, that's exactly what I want to take a look at today. So I'm Teacher Jess and welcome back to GR Cafe. And today I want to start with my first video of the Favorite Finals series. And thank you very much to my grade 10s for helping me come up with that name. I have carefully worked through multiple past IEB papers to see if I could find the favorite questions covering mid-latitude cyclones, and I've compiled them together along with their model answers. So let's check it out. These questions may be frequently asked, but this does not mean that this is the only way that these questions can or will be examined. Topics may be excluded altogether, and there is no guarantee on what will be in an exam paper or how it would be examined. So in the first one, I want to take a look at mid-latitude cyclones. This is a topic that gets covered very frequently, bearing in mind not every year is guaranteed to have all the topics. There may be a year where certain topics do get excluded, but mid-latitude cyclones comes up very often. The first and most important question that we need to know about is, what is a mid-latitude cyclone? The first question that we have to be able to answer is, define a mid-latitude cyclone. And this was the best definition that I could find. It is a traveling low pressure system that has both a cold front and a warm front. And in this case, with these past papers, we are looking specifically at South Africa. So it would bring weather that impacts the Southern Cape during the winter months. So the Southern Cape, if you're not sure, that is the Western and the Eastern Cape basically combined together. So it's that general area. This is actually the most frequently asked question. Identify the feature. So they will give you a synoptic weather map, and I'll give you examples of it now. And the map will have various labels, A, B, whatever. And they ask you to identify the weather feature or just identify label A. And I've compiled a few different examples. So in mid-latitude cyclones, the weather feature will either be the actual cyclone itself, it would be a cold front, a warm front, or an occluded front. So let's start with the mid-latitude cyclone by itself. So these are all different screenshots of the type of synoptic weather maps that have been included in exams. Over here, it's the entire system. A mid-latitude cyclone is the entire system. We have a cold front and a warm front, and we've got that low pressure system over there, and all of it is connected. Then a cold front specifically, they'll point to this band over here. So like there where you see C, and there's C, and there's label A. It's on this band, and you see these little triangles, or like you can imagine them as like icicles. This is a cold front, which means that all of the air behind it will be cold. So if you see the band with the little triangle or the spikes, that is a cold front. A warm front will typically be just south, or the southern part of the mid-latitude cyclone. A warm front is often marked in red, and if it's not marked in red, it will be marked with these little semicircles. You see them over there. The blue part would be your cold front with your little icicles, your little pointy spikes. And then your warm front is this red band with the semicircles. And then finally, an occluded front. I will go into what an occluded front is, one of the questions. An occluded front, you will see either they've blended the two colors together. So the blue and the red, they've blended them together to make a purple. Or if it's not a color image, you can see it's a combination of the symbols. So you can see there's a little spike and there's a little semicircle. So they've basically merged together and formed an occluded front. The next very popular question that they like to ask is describing the weather that is brought by either the mid-latitude cyclone or the cold front. Remember, South Africa, or the Southern Cape of South Africa, is, I would say, almost exclusively impacted by cold fronts. There is a question further down asking about the warm fronts. We in South Africa don't actually experience any type of warm fronts. Okay, so any weather brought in by mid-latitude cyclone would be from a cold front. The first one I have actually seen by itself, knowing the type of cloud. So the cloud it brings are the tall cumulonimbus clouds, and that means it's bringing heavy rain for a long period of time. You must know the precipitation, you must know temperature, you must know wind, and any other weather conditions that come with it. Precipitation, we have large cumulonimbus clouds, heavy rain for a long period of time. You will obviously experience very cold temperatures. It is a cold front, so temperatures will drop, and you'll also notice very strong wind. The wind direction would change. We refer to that as backing. This by itself is also a question I've seen. They've asked, how does the wind direction change? And they'll give multiple different answers. It changes by backing. We sometimes see frost, snow, and hail. That is in the very extreme, very strong mid-latitude cyclones, very strong cold fronts. We can see snow, we can see hail and frost, especially if it gets cold enough. Out in the sea, we might have very rough seas, very tall waves. Sometimes the synoptic weather map or the information will actually tell you something about that, something like 5-meter waves or 5-meter swells. Just keep an eye out for that information as well. We would notice an increase in humidity and there will be unstable air. And yes, I did say that this is actually a question that does get asked by itself multiple occasions. What type of cloud do we find in front of or in a cold front? And simply the cumulonimbus cloud. It's a very tall cloud that forms as the air quickly rises up in front of the cold front, and it forms these massive towering clouds that bring with it this severe rainfall, snow, hail, all of that. Another absolute favorite, draw a cross section. So they're asked to draw cross sections of multiple different parts of the mid-latitude cyclone. In one case, they actually asked just to draw a cross section of a mid-latitude cyclone. Now, if you remember, a mid-latitude cyclone has a cold front and a warm front, so include both of the fronts in your diagram. The cold front will always have this curved shape. The warm front has a gentle gradient straight line from the ground. Always draw it in this direction. So always have the cold air on the left and the cold front on the left and the warm front on the right. So if we go back to our earlier diagrams over here, you can see you've got the cold on this side and the warm on that side. Always the cold front on the left and warm front on the right. Then it will always be moving from A to B. So it's always moving towards the east. Then we have the cumulonimbus clouds by the cold front, and we have the stratus clouds by the warm front. In the middle, you have the warm air. Behind the cold front, we have cold air, and in front of the warm front, we also have cold or cool air. Then the cross section of a cold front. So the way that they like to ask this is they'll have a diagram. So I've just taken a little extract of the diagrams, and they'll have this line that goes through. They're like X and Y or A and B, and then they'll ask you to draw a cross section from A and B or X and Y. So you need to be able to recognize that this is a cold front. So that's like your first question again. You need to be able to see that this is a cold front and know which diagram to draw. So once again, we have a curved line. They actually included the symbols. It's maybe worth doing. We have the cumulonimbus clouds that are busy rising up. We have heavy rainfall. Always include your actual labels of X and Y and maybe actually show which way the system is moving. So here they show it with the wind direction. So we have the wind moving towards the east, and then we have this air being forced to rise, making a cumulonimbus cloud. There we've got that curved cold front again. You see that there's actually a mark for the right shape. So having a curved cold front, the flat line is the warm front. That brings us to warm fronts. So a cross section of a warm front, we have that flat line from the ground slowly moving upwards. You can see the movement of the system, and the wind is always towards the east. We have this cold air in front of it and warm air behind it. The types of clouds is a nimbus stratus or just a stratus cloud. And then finally, the last one that they've asked is a warm front occlusion. So warm front occlusion is when the cold front catches up to the warm front and they've basically merged together. So we saw the occlusion of the diagram or the symbols earlier. The way that they might ask that is they'll give you an occluded front. Like over here, we have this occlusion that's happening on the synoptic weather map. They've again drawn the line going through it there from J to K, and they asked to draw a cross section, and in this case they actually identified of the warm front occlusion. There is a difference between a warm and a cold front. So far, the warm front occlusion seems to be the most frequently asked occlusion. Basically, start by drawing a warm front. So we have that over here, right? So if it's a warm front occlusion, start by drawing a warm front. That's the one that connects to the ground. Then add your cold front because it's being occluded, right? We've got two fronts merging together. We have very, very cold air in front of it, coldest air in front of it, cold air behind it. The warm air is being lifted up by these two fronts, and then make sure you've actually labeled the front. So make sure you've labeled your warm and your cold front. Maybe even include the little symbols just to be safe. Then, what are the economic impacts of a cold front or mid-latitude cyclone? Now, I've actually split it into positives and negatives. With the impacts, the economic impacts, you can include both. You probably should include both. In this one, I've just unpacked all of the negatives. In the next question, I've unpacked all of the positives. One is that it can impact farming and agriculture. So I'm not going into that one just yet. You'll see why in a moment. So it impacts farming and agriculture, which, means loss of food, loss of income, economic impacts, job, crop failure, all of that. Air traffic may be grounded, so limited transportation or delays in transportation. Large sea swells may hinder shipping and fishing. So the shipping element can impact the trade and transport as well, and fishing being a part of our economy. And we can have flooding, so that can be flash floods, loss of property, loss of infrastructure, loss of lives, and everything that comes with flooding. Roads may be shut down from heavy rain. So this is something that we do experience with the very severe storms, where people are actually advised to stay off the roads, and it has been one or two occasions where storms have been so bad that they have shut down schools because they don't feel it's safe for people to be traveling on the roads. There is a massive cost, especially to insurance or any other type of financial loss. So if you do have damage to infrastructure or property or anything like that, or even, crop failure or something, then insurance will cover that or is expected to cover that. And that could be a big financial loss, especially if they're looking to rebuild or just do repairs after the damage. There could be food shortages, so not only from the whole agricultural impact, but just a matter of people not being able to access the stores. If your roads are shut down or your businesses are shut down, then people can't get to the shops and they can't get themselves food. Especially if this is multiple cold fronts coming in back to back and you have this prolonged extreme weather conditions. So we might have a loss of tourism if there's certain places that are maybe shut because of rain or heavy flooding or snowfall. Then the tourists can't go out and go explore and enjoy their holidays, which is also a negative impact on the economy, which brings in a lot of money from tourism. People will generally use a lot more electricity and a lot more power during the cold front because it's cold and we're trying to keep warm, and that can lead to power cuts. Generally, you would have loss of productivity. Maybe people can't get to work. Power cuts means that businesses can't stay open, and overall, we see financial loss. And of course, damage to infrastructure. This one is usually worth significantly higher marks, and they often like to link it to a case study. So they'll give you a little bit of information about a place and then ask how a cold front could impact the economy of that. But there are also positive impacts to these mid-latitude cyclones and these cold fronts. If the question is asking for the impact of cold fronts, you can look at positives and negatives. So in this question, they were exclusively asking about the positive impacts. We have a lot of water that is brought from the rainfall or from snowmelt. So the snow would melt and feed into the streams and feed into the dams and all of the hydrological systems. It can potentially bring tourists. So I was saying earlier that there could be a loss in tourism if places are shut down or people can't get around. But with snowfall, people might want to go and visit the snow. So there is also that side of the story. So I mentioned that it brings rain. That is actually the primary source of water for the Western and I think Eastern Cape as well, is the cold fronts. And then water is used in all circumstances. So industrial, domestic, agricultural, all of those places we need the water. We also see reduced risk of wildfires. It supports biodiversity. So all of that lovely ecosystems and flora and fauna that we see in the Western Cape, that exists because of the cold fronts. So otherwise, the Western Cape is near a cold ocean current, which means that would actually be quite dry, desert-like ecosystems. But fortunately, because of the cold fronts and the mid-latitude cyclones, it brings in a lot of rainfall. Increased reserves of groundwater, and the wind can also be a source of clean energy. Now, these questions have been quite general, but sometimes they do ask very specific questions. So how would the cold front impact agriculture? Again, we've got positive and negatives. Agriculture, we can have damage to the crop. If it's extremely cold, the crop could die. There could be frost. It could maybe stunt the growth of the crop. So maybe there would be a delayed planting season or delayed growth. Very often some plants need somewhat warmer temperatures to grow. So if it dips below that temperature, it would slow down the growth. Prolonged rainfall, especially if you've got multiple cold fronts coming in back to back. The long period of rainfall can mean that the soil gets waterlogged, or we might have soil erosion. And if you know anything about gardening or growing plants, then you know that plants shouldn't be overwatered. If the soil gets waterlogged, it can can basically drown the plant. It can be a breeding ground for bacteria or fungi or any type of illness that can possibly destroy the crop or the plants. We could also see loss of livestock. Unfortunately, the cold can have an impact on the animals, and it can also mean a fodder or food shortage for these animals. Stock loss if it's too cold, so that is referring to any kind of crop or stock that has been stored already. If it freezes over, it could possibly get damaged. Positives, it brings rain and it fills the dams, and we need that for irrigation. Because the Western Cape has a Mediterranean climate with the cold fronts during winter, it does also open up opportunities for a bigger variety of crop to be grown. So that can be a win to the economy as well. And then how can a cold front impact shipping? I've only actually found negative impacts on this. We can have very strong winds and sea swells. That can mean that a ship maybe has to anchor outside of port or outside of the harbor. It might use a lot more fuel, which could be a lot more costly to the ship. Maybe entry to the harbor could be delayed or restricted. You could have damage to the ship if it gets pushed into the breakwaters, and overall just delay in trade or any type of activity in the port. Okay, so we have taken a look at the economic impacts of these cold fronts, but they are not the only ones that are impacted. People are also very much impacted by the cold fronts, and they have asked about the most vulnerable people in these situations. So those would usually be any people who are living in informal settlements or rural areas. So rural communities can very often be left homeless if the houses or the settlements are not built up to the necessary standards. It can get damaged or completely destroyed from the storms. People could even be trapped in their houses with all of the flooding and roads cut off. They might not be able to access basic services or food supply or anything like that. And it's the same thing for informal houses or any kind of substandard houses that can easily get damaged. Maybe if you have excessive rainfall or even snow. If we have too much snow on the roof of a house, that house could collapse. The excessive rain could cause all kinds of water damage. You could have flooding if it's in a low-lying area. And unfortunately, very often these informal settlements are in low-lying areas or near floodplains. So if there is a flood from a lot of rain, these places can be completely destroyed or washed away. How does a mid-latitude cyclone form? We have a mass of very warm, moist air that meets this colder, drier air. The cold, dense polar air will wedge behind the warm subtropical air and force that subtropical air to rise. In the stationary or the initial stage, the wind will be blowing past each other, so just in the opposite directions past the cold or past the fronts, and then Coriolis will cause the wind to deflect, which will have a clockwise movement or a cyclonic movement, and then the wind will blow at the polar front at an angle, and that will cause this turning motion of the mid-latitude cyclone. When it comes to identifying the stage of development, there are two main stages that they have asked about. One is the mature stage. So the mature stage is where you have a clear defined cold and warm front. Okay, now I know that this isn't a warm front. I'll explain that one in a minute. So I included this diagram as well. So here we've got a clear cold front and a clear warm front. But do you see that these two lines aren't overlapping yet? See there, they've got this little peak shape that they made, but they haven't started to merge yet, which means that they're not occluding. If you see this there, where they've overlapped each other, then it's an occluded front. Okay, so you can see that the cold front is starting to occlude with the warm front, and you might also see it in that purple color again. Okay, so those are the two types of stages that I ask about, either mature or occluded. So mature, you have a very well-formed cold front and warm front, but they are not occluding yet. For the occluded stage, you can see that they start to overlap there and there. And that's when they're occluded. Then how does an occlusion form? The cold front travels faster than the warm front, so it starts to catch up. And then when it does, the warm air is kind of caught in between these two fronts and it's forced to rise. So then the cold front and the warm front are joined together. And that is how you get an occluded front. What is a group of mid-latitude cyclones called? The short answer, a family. You'll see something like this, where you have this cold and this warm, and then a cold and a warm, and you can see that they're connected to each other. So they're connected. Here we've got one there and one there. So if you've got several mid-latitude cyclones all connected, that is called a family. You'll see multiple low pressure systems over here, and you see multiple different fronts connected to them. That is a family. Then, what season is South Africa experiencing? So they'll either ask what season and then provide evidence, or they will ask for evidence to confirm that this is winter. Now, this does overlap with other topics, but when it comes to mid-latitude cyclones, the number one piece of evidence is the presence of a cold front over South Africa. So you can see over here, we've got South Africa there outlined, and here we have a cold front moving towards the east over South Africa. Generally, these are all of the different points of evidence that they would accept. So we have cold front is approaching over the land. We have high pressure over the interior, clear air over the interior, and low temperatures. Now remember, the Western Cape, so over here, or the Western and the Eastern Cape over here, are the only two places that will experience rainfall in winter. You can see there's that high pressure and there's nothing else over here. There's no other clouds. So that's what I mean by there's clear skies over the interior. So here there's no clouds, no rainfall. We can't see any of the temperatures, but presumably it's also cold. We have some clouds or rainfall over the Western Cape, and we have a cold front that is busy approaching. And then, why does the Western Cape rarely experience warm fronts? Well, simply put, they're too far south. So a warm front is usually positioned just south or somewhat south of the mid-latitude cyclone, which means that it's too far south to actually reach or have an effect on South Africa. You can see that here. Here's the whole mid-latitude cyclone. Here's the cold front busy approaching. And there is that red line, the warm front that is quite far south. And the same thing here. There's the cold front, there's South Africa, and there is the warm front further south. And just to wrap it up, I do want to thank SlidesGo. That is where I found this template for these slides. So I think they were absolutely lovely. Very nicely designed. Before we completely wrap up, I do want to just ask, are there any other topics that you would like me to go over? Any specific units that you want me to revise for the exams going forward? Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully this was useful, that you learned something new and maybe had a few questions answered. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Okay, cheers. Bye.